Professor Velkan adjusted his 3 optical sensors and gazed across the amphitheater filled with eager young minds from 17 different species. The Galactic University's Extinction Studies class was always his favorite to teach, mainly because students never expected the dark humor that came with studying dead civilizations. Today, class, we examine the fascinating topic of planetary extinction events, Velkan announced, his tentacles gesturing dramatically. Can anyone provide me with examples of species that have completely vanished from the galactic record? 6 arms shot up immediately. A young Zephyrian female with purple scales practically vibrated in her seat. Ooh. Ooh. The silicon crawlers of Nexus Prime. They turned their entire planet into glass trying to harness stellar energy. Excellent, Miss Karathi, Velkan nodded approvingly. Overconfidence in technology. Classic extinction pathway number 47. A bulky Throngan student raised his massive claw. The hive mind of Sector 9. They achieved perfect unity and then got bored to death. Literally. The class erupted in chittering laughter. Even Velkan couldn't suppress an amused trill. Ah yes, Mr. Grull. Evolutionary dead end through excessive cooperation. Fascinating case study. More examples followed. The crystal singers who shattered their own dimension with resonance experiments. The time merchants who sold their past to buy their future and ended up with neither. Each tale more absurd than the last, and Velkan was thoroughly enjoying himself. It's when he noticed it. In the back corner, partially hidden behind a towering crystalline exchange student, sat the human. Marcus Kane, if Velkan remembered the enrollment correctly. The human hadn't participated much in class discussions, preferring to observe with those unsettling binocular eyes that seemed to track everything, but now, slowly, tentatively, the human raised his hand. The entire amphitheater fell silent. Even the usually chattering Pixari students stopped their incessant whispers. Everyone knew about humans, of course. The newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel. Primitive by galactic standards, barely 500 years since they'd discovered agriculture. Most professors treated them as amusing curiosities, like watching a toddler play with advanced calculus. Yes, Mr. Kane? Velkan's voice carried just a hint of condescension. Do you have an example of an extinct species? The human stood slowly, and Velkan noticed something odd. The creature wasn't nervous like most first-year students. There was something in his posture that seemed almost predatory. No, that couldn't be right. Humans were herbivores, weren't they? Or was it omnivores? Velkan made a mental note to review the species files later. Well, sir, Marcus began, his voice surprisingly steady, there were the Neanderthals. Velkan blinked all 3 optical sensors in confusion. I'm not familiar with that species. Which sector did they inhabit? Earth, sir. My home planet. A ripple of interest passed through the class. The Zephyrian student leaned forward eagerly. Oh. Were they destroyed by asteroid impact? Solar flares? Gamma-ray burst? The human's mouth curved upward in what Velkan had learned was called a smile, though this one seemed different somehow. Colder. No, miss. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Karathi. Zalara Karathi, she practically squeaked with excitement. Thank you, Miss Karathi. No, the Neanderthals weren't destroyed by cosmic events. Marcus paused, and his smile widened just a fraction. We killed them. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the building's ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. Velkan felt his chromatophores shifting involuntarily through the spectrum of confusion. Excuse me? Velkan stammered. Could you clarify that statement? We hunted them down, Professor. Systematically. Over thousands of years. They were stronger than us, had better cold adaptations, larger brain capacity. But we were better at working together. Better at making tools. Better at warfare. The human's voice remained conversational, almost casual. We outcompete them for resources, drove them from their territories, and when that wasn't enough. He shrugged, we just killed them directly. Miss Karathi's scales had faded to a sickly pale purple. But that's genocide. Technically, yes, Marcus agreed cheerfully. Though we prefer to call it evolutionary pressure. Much more academic sounding, don't you think? Velkan's mind was reeling. In all his years of teaching extinction studies, he'd never encountered a species that had simply murdered their closest relatives into oblivion. Most civilizations at least had the decency to destroy themselves through incompetence or overreach. Surely this is an isolated incident in your species' history? Velkan managed to ask, though something in the human's expression suggested otherwise. Marcus tilted his head, considering. Well, there were also the Denisovans. Same general approach, really. And if we're being thorough about it. He began counting on his fingers. There were at least 6 other human subspecies that we systematically eliminated before achieving global dominance. The amphitheater was so quiet that Velkan could hear his own heartbeat through his primary circulation system. Even the usually boisterous Throngan student had gone completely still, his massive form frozen in what could only be described as shock. 8 separate species, Marcus continued with academic precision, all closely related to us. All potentially viable. All extinct now because, well. He smiled that cold smile again, there can only be one apex predator per planet. Professor Velkan realized with growing horror that he might need to completely revise his understanding of what extinction looked like. Because apparently, sometimes it didn't come from above in the form of asteroids or cosmic radiation. Sometimes it came from below, wearing a friendly face and speaking in measured, reasonable tones about systematic murder, and the most terrifying part? The human seemed genuinely proud of it. The silence stretched on for what felt like geological ages. Professor Velkan's optical sensors darted between his students and the human who stood there looking perfectly comfortable, as if he'd just commented on the weather rather than described multiple genocides. Finally, a brave Aquarian student near the front raised her fin tremblingly. "Mr. Kane, surely you're exaggerating? For dramatic effect?" Marcus turned those unsettling binocular eyes toward her. "Not at all, Miss Torvin. Would you like specific examples? The archaeological evidence is quite comprehensive." He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting the posture of a guest lecturer. Take the extinction of Homo erectus in Southeast Asia. We have clear stratigraphic evidence showing modern human settlements appearing precisely when erectus populations begin declining. Fascinating correlation, really. Miss Torvin's gills fluttered rapidly, a sure sign of Aquarian distress. But perhaps they died from disease? Natural causes? Oh, disease played a role, Marcus agreed with that same cheerful tone. We were excellent at spreading pathogens to which we'd developed immunity, but they hadn't. Biological warfare, you might call it, though we weren't sophisticated enough to do it intentionally back then. He paused thoughtfully. Well, not always intentionally. The Throngan student, Grull, finally found his voice. This is madness. No civilized species exterminates their own kind. Marcus's laugh was genuinely amused, and somehow that made it infinitely more terrifying. Mr. Grull, I think you misunderstand. They weren't our kind. That was precisely the problem. Close enough to compete for the same ecological niche, different enough that we felt no kinship obligation. His expression grew more serious. Evolution doesn't care about your moral sensibilities. It only cares about who survives to reproduce. Professor Velkan realized his chromatophores were cycling through panic colors and forced himself to stabilize. Surely, Mr. Kane, this behavior ended once your species developed civilization? Advanced ethics? Moral philosophy? The human smile returned, and Velkan immediately regretted asking. Oh, Professor, you really should study our more recent history. We've gotten so much more efficient at extinction since then. What do you mean? The question slipped out before Velkan could stop himself. Well, we've eliminated approximately 63% of all large mammal species on our planet just in the last few thousand years. The passenger pigeon alone numbered in the billions, until we decided we needed their habitat for agriculture. Took us less than a century to render them completely extinct. Marcus began pacing slightly, clearly warming to his subject. The woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, the giant ground sloth. Cave bears, dire wolves, short-faced bears. We've been quite thorough, really. Miss Karathi made a small whimpering sound. But those were just animals. Surely you didn't kill other sapient species? Marcus finished helpfully. Oh, we absolutely did that too. The Tasmanian peoples, for instance. Hunted to extinction in less than 75 years after European contact. Quite systematically, actually. There were government bounties. The amphitheater was now filled with the sound of various species expressing distress in their own ways. Chittering, thrumming, the soft whistle of escaping gases. Velkan found himself backing away from the human instinctively, even though a lecture podium separated them. You see, Professor, Marcus continued conversationally, most species in your database probably went extinct through bad luck, cosmic events, or simple evolutionary pressure. But humans? He spread his hands in a gesture that might have been modest under different circumstances. We're extinction events that learn to walk upright and make tools. A new voice spoke up from the back of the amphitheater. What about your current era? It was Crix, a normally silent Vorthan exchange student. Surely your species has moved beyond such behaviors? Marcus's expression became genuinely thoughtful. That's actually a fascinating question, Mr. Crix. We're currently in the middle of what our scientists call the sixth mass extinction. The fifth one killed the dinosaurs, by the way. Asteroid impact, very dramatic. He gestured casually. This one is entirely our doing. We're eliminating species at roughly 1,000 times the natural background rate. But why? Miss Torvin gasped. Mostly just because we need the space, Marcus replied with a shrug. Sometimes because they're inconvenient. Occasionally because we find them tasty. He paused. Though to be fair, we've also gotten much better at choosing which species to keep around. We've domesticated quite a few, turned them into living tools. Much more efficient than extinction, really. Professor Velkan realized with growing horror that every textbook in his field would need to be rewritten. All those extinction events they studied, caused by cosmic disasters, evolutionary dead ends, technological hubris. And here was a species that caused extinctions the way others caused art or music. Casually, efficiently, and with apparent pride in their methodology. Mr. Kane, Velkan managed to croak, what does your species plan to do now that you've achieved interstellar travel? The human smiled that cold smile one final time. Well, Professor, I suppose that depends entirely on how interesting we find our new neighbors. His eyes slowly swept across the amphitheater, making contact with each terrified student. And whether they occupy any ecological niches we might find useful. The bell chimed, indicating the end of class period. As students began filing out in unusual quiet, Marcus gathered his materials and walked toward the exit. Just before leaving, he turned back to Professor Velkan. Same time next week, Professor? I'd love to hear about more extinct species. We humans are always eager to learn from the successes of others. And with that, he was gone, leaving behind an amphitheater full of beings who suddenly understood that they might be attending a very different kind of class than they'd originally thought.